Racist. The word exploded through the school corridors like a bomb, shattering the 15 years of life Marcus Johnson had built with dignity and excellence. In a matter of hours, his stellar grades, his track record of leadership in the student council, and his medals in academic competitions turned to dust, buried by a single accusation that spread like poison. The thunderous sound of Principal Elizabeth Thompson's gavel echoed through the meeting room, instantly silencing the heated voices swirling in the air. Marcus sat with tense shoulders, silent tears streaming down his face. Across the table, Jennifer Martinez, the academic coordinator, read aloud an accusation that seemed pulled straight from a nightmare: discriminatory behavior and propagation of racial hate speech. The irony of the situation was almost tangible. Marcus, a young black man who had grown up listening to his family's stories of resilience and learning the importance of equality, now found himself on the other side of the fence, accused of the very prejudice he had always fought against. His mother, Olivia Johnson, a respected judge at the local courthouse, held his hand beneath the table, transmitting a silent strength he so desperately needed at that moment. "This is absurd." Olivia's voice cut through the silence like a sharp blade. "My son has a history of excellence in this school. How can you give credence to such a serious accusation without concrete evidence?" Principal Thompson adjusted her gold-rimmed glasses, her face a mask of false neutrality. "Mrs. Johnson, I understand your position as a mother, but we have 5 witnesses who claim to have seen your son making racist remarks during last Thursday's break. As an institution, we have zero tolerance for discrimination." Marcus felt his stomach churn. That Thursday had been like any other, or so he thought. He'd attended debate club, had lunch with his usual friends, and worked on his history project about civil rights movements. How could his life be turned upside down in a matter of days? "I want to see those witnesses," Olivia demanded, years of courtroom experience reflected in her posture. "I want to hear their testimonies and confront these accusations properly." That's when the first twist struck everyone like lightning on a clear day. Peter Richardson, the popular senior, entered the room uninvited, his usually confident face now marked by a troubled expression. "I need to speak," he said, his voice trembling. "I can't be part of this lie anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. Principal Thompson frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the interruption, but Peter continued, "Marcus is being accused unfairly. All of this was planned." Peter's words set off a chain of events that no one could have foreseen. As he began revealing the first details of a conspiracy fueled by envy and prejudice, Marcus watched the faces around him shift, from judgment to confusion, from confusion to shame. But this was just the tip of the iceberg. What no one in that room knew was that the injustice Marcus had suffered would become the catalyst for something much greater, not just in his life, but throughout the entire school community. Olivia, sensing the gravity of the moment, pulled out her phone and began recording. Years of experience in the judicial system had taught her that the truth, no matter how painful, needed to be documented. Every word Peter spoke, every trembling confession, every detail of the conspiracy was being captured. The meeting, which had begun as an informal courtroom to judge Marcus, transformed into something entirely different. As Peter continued his account, the students waiting outside the room, part of the group that had testified against Marcus, began showing signs of nervousness. Through the glass windows, their pale faces and restless expressions were clearly visible. Principal Thompson, who just moments earlier exuded unquestionable authority, now looked smaller in her chair. Her hand, which had gripped the gavel with such conviction, now trembled slightly as she took notes. Marcus, still silent, felt a confusing mix of emotions: relief that his innocence was coming to light, anger at the injustice he had endured, and a deep sadness upon realizing that his supposed peers had been capable of orchestrating something so cruel. Olivia, maintaining her professional composure but with eyes shining with determination, knew this was only the beginning. The truth was emerging, yes, but the path to true justice would be much longer and far more complex than a simple confession could resolve. The clock on the wall read 2:47 p.m. when Peter finished his account. The silence that followed was different from before. It was no longer laden with accusations and judgments, but instead carried a collective understanding that something significant had just happened. "This changes everything," Principal Thompson finally said, her voice softer than before. "But it also raises very serious questions about our school community." Olivia stood, her presence filling the room. "No, Principal Thompson. This doesn't change everything. This only begins everything. We have a lot of work ahead of us." Marcus, watching his mother, felt a new kind of strength rise within him. The injustice he had suffered was painful, yes, but it had also planted a seed of change that, though he didn't yet realize it, would grow into something much bigger than himself. As Olivia would later write in her journal, sometimes injustice must be laid bare for true justice to begin to take root. The days that followed the meeting in the principal's office dragged on like an eternity for Marcus. The school's main hallway, once his daily path to small victories and dreams, had turned into a runway of sideways glances and poorly concealed whispers. His locker, previously adorned with medals from academic competitions, greeted him one morning with an anonymous note. Hypocrite. During lunch, the table he used to share with his friends remained empty. Marcus watched from afar as David, his best friend since 6th grade, sat with another group, avoiding his gaze. The silent betrayal hurt more than any hateful words ever could. "You don't have to go to school this week," Olivia had suggested the night before, her hands steady as she prepared a dinner neither of them would be able to eat. "We can wait for things to calm down." But Marcus knew that backing down would be a way of admitting guilt. "If I'm not there, Mom, they'll tell their version of the story. I need to be present so they can see the truth." At home, Olivia had transformed the living room into an improvised war room. Files were spread across the couch, meticulous notes on every detail of Peter's confession, records of all the hateful messages Marcus received on social media. As a judge, she understood the power of evidence. As a mother, she felt every blow against her son as if it were a wound to her own heart. "I don't understand," Marcus confided one particularly difficult night, his voice tight as he held his phone. "Rachel just kicked me out of the study group. We worked together on that civil rights project for months. How can she believe that I?" Olivia abandoned her documents and sat beside her son. "Fear and prejudice have terrible power, son. They make people doubt even what they know to be true." At school, the atmosphere grew heavier with each passing day. Teachers who once praised his class contributions now barely made eye contact. Only his history teacher, Mrs. Anderson, continued to treat him with the same dignity as always, though her eyes carried a sorrowful understanding. During a literature class, while the class discussed To Kill a Mockingbird, Marcus felt the crushing weight of irony in his chest. How many times had he passionately discussed that book, defending the importance of justice and truth? Now, like Atticus Finch, his mother was fighting a system seemingly determined to condemn without proof. The group that had falsely testified against him began showing cracks in their unity. Marcus noticed the nervous glances exchanged between them, especially after Peter's confession. Amanda Chin, one of the supposed witnesses, crossed paths with him in the empty hallway after school one day. Her eyes were red from crying, but whatever words she might have said died on her lips before she turned and hurried away. At home, in the silent hours of the night, Marcus found refuge in the old family albums. Photos of his father, who had passed away when he was young, holding signs at civil rights protests. Newspaper clippings about his mother's first cases as a judge, breaking barriers in a system traditionally dominated by white men. "Your father used to say," Olivia remarked one night, finding her son engrossed in the photographs, "that the truth is like water. It can be blocked, diverted, even dammed up for a while. But it always finds its way." Peter's confession had planted a seed of doubt in the fertile soil of truth, but the path to justice still seemed impossibly long. Marcus knew that every step would be a battle, every day a new test of his strength and conviction. It was during one of those sleepless nights that he started to write. At first, just scattered words, angry outbursts scribbled into his notebook. Then something more structured began to emerge, a detailed journal of every interaction, every look, every whisper in the hallways. If his story needed to be told, he would make sure every detail was preserved. "We need to be strategic," Olivia explained over breakfast, her eyes tired but resolute. "Peter opened an important crack with his confession, but there's more to this story. Much more." Marcus nodded, turning over the untouched toast on his plate. The knot in his stomach, present since the beginning of that nightmare, felt like it had become a permanent companion. But something inside him was changing. The initial pain was transforming into a quiet determination. In the last class of the week, as he packed up his books, Marcus found a different anonymous note in his locker. "Not everyone believes the lies." The handwriting was unfamiliar, but those words carried the weight of a promise. The truth, like water, was beginning to find its cracks to flow through. What Marcus didn't know as he walked home that afternoon, was that the events of the following week would change not only his story but that of the entire school. The truth, dammed up for so long, was about to overflow. As his mother would later write in her notes, "Sometimes, it takes someone being falsely accused for an entire structure of injustice to come to light. My son didn't ask to be that someone, but now that he's in this position, we'll make sure every moment of pain serves a greater purpose." The rain lashed against the windows of the Johnson residence when the doorbell rang, shortly after 7 in the evening. Marcus, hunched over his books at the kitchen table, lifted his eyes briefly as his mother walked toward the door. The insistent chime of the bell blended with the drumming of the rain, creating a disquieting symphony that seemed to foreshadow the revelations about to unfold. The past few days had been an exercise in endurance. Marcus tried to maintain his study routine despite the weight of the stares and whispers that followed him through the school hallways. Peter's confession had planted a seed of doubt in the narrative that condemned him, but the full truth still lingered in the shadows. When Olivia opened the door, she found Amanda Chin completely drenched, trembling, not just from the rain but from the burden of what she was about to reveal. Her eyes were red and swollen, and her hands wouldn't stop shaking, even as Olivia guided her inside and wrapped her in a dry towel. Marcus froze when he recognized one of the students who had testified against him. His first instinct was to get up and leave the kitchen, but something in Amanda's devastated expression kept him rooted in place. The girl now standing in his kitchen looked nothing like the one who had sat confidently in the principal's office days earlier, claiming with apparent conviction that she had heard him make racist comments. "Would you like some tea?" Olivia offered, her voice carrying the professional calm that years on the bench had cultivated. Amanda nodded weakly, water still dripping from her dark hair. "I can't carry this anymore," she finally said after several tense minutes broken only by the soft whistle of the kettle. "It was all planned. But it's so much worse than you think. It wasn't just jealousy over your grades, Marcus. It was because of your run for student body president." Amanda's words revealed a web of manipulation that extended far beyond a group of students. Michael Harrison, the son of the school's biggest donor and Marcus's opposing candidate, had orchestrated the entire situation. But he hadn't acted alone. His father. Amanda hesitated, clutching the mug of tea Olivia handed her. Mr. Harrison said that if Marcus won the election, he'd pull their donations from the school's scholarship program. Principal Thompson knew about it from the start. Olivia felt the blood in her veins turn cold. As a judge, she had faced corruption cases before, but seeing this kind of manipulation directly impact her son, in an environment that should have been safe and educational, was devastating. Quietly, she reached for her phone and began recording with a brief nod of consent from Amanda. "That's why she was so quick to accept the accusations," Marcus murmured, the pieces clicking into place in his mind. "That's why she didn't investigate properly." Amanda continued unraveling the details, her voice growing stronger as the truth poured out. Michael Harrison had built an elaborate system of favors and threats. To some, he promised glowing recommendation letters for Ivy League universities. To others, like Amanda, he wielded personal information as a weapon for blackmail. "He found out about my history of anxiety and depression," Amanda admitted, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He threatened to expose it to the whole school, to say I was too unstable to participate in the mentorship program I've worked so hard for." The Johnsons' kitchen, usually a space of comfort and family conversations, had turned into an impromptu interrogation room. Marcus's notebook, once filled with math equations and literary quotes, now recorded a very different story, one of corruption, manipulation, and abusive power. "But why are you telling us this now?" Marcus asked, his voice a mix of sorrow and curiosity. Amanda's eyes filled with tears once more. "My sister is only 11, she began, her voice breaking. "Last night she came home from school in tears. Some kids had pulled their eyes back, making gestures. You know how it is?" She stopped, swallowing hard. "I sat with her on the bed, wiped her tears away and started saying all those things we always say, that she needs to be strong, that she can't let prejudice win, that she needs to report it." Amanda paused, her hands gripping the teacup so tightly her fingers turned white. "And then, right in the middle of my speech about fighting injustice, it was like someone slapped me in the face. How could I be there, comforting my sister about discrimination, when I had just participated in something so terrible against you?" The night wore on and with it, more details emerged. Amanda revealed that this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. Over the past 3 years, every student council candidate who wasn't part of Mr. Harrison's approved group had faced some kind of sabotage. Sarah Martinez, 2 years ago, had dropped out of the race after rumors about her family mysteriously started to spread. James Wilson had his project to reform the grading system sabotaged after refusing to follow Mr. Harrison's suggestions. Each case had been carefully covered up, the victims silenced through a mix of threats and compensations. "The others are starting to feel guilty too," Amanda added. "Especially after Peter told the truth. but everyone is afraid. Mr. Harrison, he has influence over so many universities. One phone call from him can destroy any of our futures. Olivia, who had remained relatively silent, processing every bit of information with her trained judge's mind, finally spoke. Fear only has power as long as we remain isolated. Together we can face this. It was then that Marcus had an idea. What if we weren't the only ones who knew? What if other students from previous years who had also been harmed came forward? Amanda's eyes widened, a spark of hope appearing on her face for the first time that night. I can help with that. I know some of them, they're still hurt by what happened. If they know they're not alone. The rest of the night was spent crafting a meticulous plan. While the rain continued outside, the three of them worked at the kitchen table, now covered with notes and strategy sketches. It wouldn't be an act of revenge but a systematic exposure of the truth. Every piece of evidence, every testimony, every part of this story would need to be documented and presented in a way that no one could ignore. We need to be methodical, Olivia explained, years of legal experience evident in her voice. Every allegation needs to be documented. Every testimony recorded. We can't leave room for this to be dismissed as just school gossip. Marcus, who had remained mostly silent during much of the conversation, finally spoke. We need to think beyond my situation. This is about something much bigger. The night ended well after 11, when the rain finally tapered off to a light drizzle. Amanda left with a folder full of instructions written by Olivia: how to document conversations, what kinds of evidence to look for, how to approach other potential witnesses safely. We can't let fear win, Marcus said as he said goodbye to Amanda at the door. If we back down now, how many others will suffer in the future? When Amanda finally left, a heavy silence hung over the Johnsons' house, but it was different from the silence of the past few days. This was a silence of preparation, of planning, of impending change. Son, Olivia called as Marcus was getting ready to head upstairs to his room. You understand this is going to be difficult, right? Facing powerful people is always hard. Marcus nodded, a small smile forming on his lips. You've always taught me, Mom, that justice isn't a gift, it's an achievement. I'm ready to fight for it. In his room, before going to sleep, Marcus wrote in his journal, the truth is like water trapped behind a dam. When it finds a crack, there's no barrier strong enough to hold it back. What he didn't know yet was that his actions in the coming days would trigger a chain reaction that would not only change their lives but the entire power structure that had corrupted the school for so long. As Amanda would later write in her official testimony, sometimes, it only takes one brave person to remind us that we too can be brave. Marcus wasn't just a victim of injustice. He became the catalyst we all needed to find our own voice. The fight for justice had only just begun, and this time, it wouldn't be a solitary battle. The morning after Amanda's visit dawned with a different kind of clarity. Marcus woke up before the alarm, his mind already processing the events of the previous night. In the bathroom mirror, he looked at his reflection. The same face as always, but there was something new in his eyes. A determination that replaced the sorrow of the past few days. Olivia was already in the kitchen, her laptop open on the breakfast table, several documents scattered around her. She hadn't slept much. The dark circles under her eyes betrayed a night spent reviewing past legal rulings on defamation and harassment cases in school settings. I found something interesting, she said as Marcus served himself coffee. 3 cases in the last 5 years at different schools in the district. All involving manipulation of student elections, and all with a similar pattern of intimidation. Marcus leaned over the documents, recognizing in the reports the same modus operandi Amanda had described. How did no one notice this before? Because each case was handled separately, Olivia explained, her fingers drumming on the table. The powerful people rely on that, making each victim feel alone, making each incident seem like an isolated case. At school that morning felt different from the others. The glances still followed him down the hallways, but now Marcus faced them with a new perspective. Every whisper, every diverted gaze was no longer a condemnation, but rather evidence of a system that needed to be exposed and changed. During lunch, something unexpected happened. Sarah Martinez, the girl who had dropped out of the race 2 years ago, approached his table in the library. Amanda told me, she said quietly, sitting down. About last night, about you knowing the truth. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened her backpack. I kept everything. Every email, every threatening message. I never had the courage to show it before, but now. Marcus watched as she placed a USB drive on the table. Why did you keep it all? Sarah smiled sadly. Because I knew one day someone would be brave enough to face them. I just didn't expect that person to be someone who, like me, was also a victim. The conversation with Sarah was interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. Michael Harrison, accompanied by two of his usual followers, stopped in front of their table. His arrogant smile wavered slightly when he saw Sarah. "Quite the interesting meeting," he commented, his voice dripping with false casualness. "Sharing victimhood stories?" Marcus felt his anger rise in his throat, but before he could respond, Sarah stood up, facing Michael directly. "No, Michael. We're sharing evidence." Her voice, though low, carried a surprising firmness. "And you know exactly what that means?" Michael's smile completely vanished. For a moment, he seemed as if he wanted to say something, but instead chose to leave, his footsteps echoing through the silent library. "This is going to have consequences," Sarah whispered, sitting back down. "He's going to try something?" "Tell me everything," Marcus replied, opening his notebook. "Every detail, every threat. We won't let fear silence us anymore." For the next 2 hours, Sarah shared her story. How her family had immigrated 10 years ago, how she dreamed of creating a mentorship program for foreign students, and how everything fell apart when she ran for student council. "It started with small things," she explained, her voice occasionally trembling. "Comments about my accent, suggestions that maybe I wasn't American enough to represent the students. Then came the anonymous emails, threatening to expose my parents' immigration status." Marcus documented every word, his stomach churning with the familiarity of the methods. "How many others do you think went through this?" "More than we can imagine," Sarah replied, her eyes scanning the library. "Look around, Marcus. How many talents, how many voices have been silenced because they didn't fit the right profile?" At lunch, Amanda joined them, bringing 2 more people. James Wilson, the former candidate whose project had been sabotaged, and Lisa Chen, no relation to Amanda, a veteran who was now in college but had faced a similar situation 3 years ago. "We need to be strategic," Lisa warned, her college experience bringing a more mature perspective. "Mr. Harrison isn't just a donor, he has connections throughout the school district. If we're going to do this, we need to do it right." James nodded in agreement, adding, "And we can't make this look like personal revenge. It has to be about systemic change, about creating protection so this doesn't happen to anyone else." As the day went on, more people began to approach. Some offering silent support, others sharing their own stories of bullying and manipulation. On his phone, Marcus received messages from students in other schools within the district. The story was spreading. After school, they gathered at the Johnsons' house. Olivia had turned the living room into an impromptu operations center. On the walls, a large whiteboard documented the timeline of events, connections between cases and potential allies. "What are you all planning to do?" asked Mrs. Anderson, the history teacher who had shown up on her own, bringing with her a folder of school board meeting records from the last 5 years. "We don't just want exposure," Marcus explained, his voice firm. "We want real change. Anti-bullying policies with real teeth, transparency in school donations, protection for students who report abuse." Lisa, who had been silent for a while, finally spoke up. "What if we created a document? Not just exposing what happened but proposing concrete solutions? Something other schools could use as a model?" The idea caught fire. In the following hours, the group worked tirelessly, transforming years of trauma and silence into a concrete action plan. Sarah organized the digital evidence, James drafted policy proposals based on his original research, and Amanda coordinated a growing network of contacts from other schools. Olivia watched everything with a mix of pride and concern. "You understand this won't be easy, right? Powerful people will resist any kind of change. That's why we need to be more than just a group of angry students," Marcus replied, his voice carrying a maturity that even surprised his mother. "We need to be a movement. Organized, focused, and, above all, united." As the night fell and the others began to leave, Marcus realized something fundamental had changed. The weight of injustice he had carried alone had transformed into a shared purpose. "You know what's most ironic?" he commented to his mother while they tidied up the living room. "They tried to silence me with a false accusation of racism, but in doing so, they ended up creating exactly the kind of justice movement they feared." Olivia embraced her son, her heart overflowing with pride and apprehension. "True change always starts like this, son. With people brave enough to turn their pain into purpose." That night, before going to bed, Marcus updated his journal with a new entry. "Today we learned we are not alone. That every silenced voice can become a chorus for change. Tomorrow we begin to rewrite not just my story, but the story of everyone who came before and everyone who will come after." What he didn't know yet was that the following day would bring even greater challenges, testing not only his determination but the strength of the bonds that were beginning to form in this nascent movement. As Mrs. Anderson would later write in her testimony to the school board, "In 20 years of teaching, I've never seen anything like this." It wasn't just about justice for one student, it was about giving voice to an entire generation that had been taught to remain silent in the face of power. And it all started because one young person decided they wouldn't accept being silenced. Director Elizabeth Thompson's office had always been a sanctuary of order and control. But on that Thursday morning, her hands trembled as she held a plain brown envelope with no return address. The contents, which she had just examined, threatened to destroy not only her career but the entire system she had helped uphold for 2 decades. Outside her office, Marcus and his growing group of allies had no idea the storm that was about to erupt. They had spent the week gathering testimonies, organizing documents, and building a support network that already spanned across 3 schools in the district. "We need to talk." The message from Director Thompson had arrived during chemistry class, delivered by an administrative assistant. Immediately, Marcus exchanged glances with Amanda, who was sitting 2 rows ahead. There was something in the urgent tone of the summons that felt different from the previous threats. As he walked toward the principal's office, his phone buzzed with a message from his mother. "I'm on my way to the school. Don't speak to anyone until I arrive." But as Marcus entered the principal's office, he realized this wouldn't be an ordinary conversation. Elizabeth Thompson, who was usually the epitome of professional composure, seemed to have aged a decade in just a few days. Her hands kept rearranging papers on the desk, a nervous gesture betraying her inner turmoil. "Sit down, Marcus," she said, her voice hoarse. "We need to wait for your mother to arrive." The next 15 minutes were filled with suffocating silence. The principal alternated between staring out the window and checking her phone, while Marcus watched the clock on the wall tick away each second with agonizing slowness. When Olivia finally arrived, she wasn't alone. Alongside her was Robert Chin, Amanda's father and a member of the school board. Their faces carried a gravity that made Marcus's stomach drop. "I received this morning," Director Thompson began, pushing the brown envelope across the desk. "At first, I thought it was just another attempt at intimidation. But after reading the contents," her voice faltered. Olivia took the envelope and along with Robert began to examine the documents. Marcus watched his mother's face gradually pale. "These are internal records," Robert explained to Marcus, his voice controlled but tense. "Spreadsheets, emails, memos, a detailed history of how decisions are really made at this school. And others in the district." "It wasn't just about the student council elections," Director Thompson continued, her words coming out like a painful confession. "It was an entire system designed to keep a certain type of student at the top. To ensure that certain voices were always heard more than others." The documents revealed a disturbing pattern. For years, the school had subtly manipulated everything, from the distribution of scholarships to recommendations for advanced programs. Students from certain ethnic backgrounds or social classes faced invisible yet systematic barriers. "Your candidacy for student council, Marcus," the director continued, "was just the straw that broke the camel's back. You didn't fit the profile that Mr. Harrison and other donors considered appropriate for student leadership." "How many?" Marcus asked, his voice trembling with anger. "How many other students had their dreams stolen by this system?" "Hundreds," Robert replied, flipping through the pages. Over the years, hundreds of brilliant young people were subtly discouraged, redirected, or simply ignored because they didn't fit the desired standard. Olivia, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "Who sent these documents?" "Jennifer Martinez," the director answered, surprising everyone. The pedagogical coordinator who had been one of the most critical voices against Marcus now emerged as an unlikely ally. "She's been collecting this evidence for years, waiting for the right moment to expose it." Her own daughter was a victim of this system at another school in the district. The silence that followed was broken by urgent knocks on the door. It was Amanda, followed by Sarah and other members of the group who had joined Marcus in recent days. "You need to see this," Amanda said, her tablet trembling in her hands. On the screen, a report began to circulate. "Allegations of systematic discrimination shake school district." The story was leaking. "Wasn't it you?" Marcus asked the director, who shook her head. "Jennifer must have sent copies to the press," Robert concluded. "This is going to blow up in a matter of hours." Director Thompson stood up and walked over to the window. From her vantage point, she could see the school courtyard where, for years, she had overseen a system that now she recognized as deeply unjust. "I should have done something earlier," she said, more to herself than to anyone else. How many times did I see signs, ignore evidence, justify unfair decisions in the name of the greater good of the school? What happens now? Marcus asked, looking at his mother. Olivia, with years of experience in complex cases, was already formulating a plan. Now we turn this into something constructive. We don't just want exposure, we want real reform. I'm willing to cooperate fully, Director Thompson declared, turning to face the group. I'll submit my resignation, but before that, I want to help dismantle this system. It's the least I can do to start correcting years of injustice. The following hours were a whirlwind. Marcus's phone kept vibrating with messages from other students, many sharing their own stories of subtle discrimination. The press began to gather at the school gates, while on social media, the hashtag Justice in Schools was spreading rapidly. We need to act fast, Robert warned. Before they try to suppress this or control the narrative. It was Amanda who had the idea that would change everything. What if we turned our original proposal into something bigger? Not just about the student council or this school, but a comprehensive reform plan for the entire district. Marcus's eyes lit up. A manifesto for real change. With specific policies, oversight mechanisms, and with the evidence we have now, Olivia added, we can demand real structural changes. Director Thompson, who had been silent for a few minutes, suddenly spoke up. I have more documents. At home. Years of records that can further strengthen your case. The group worked tirelessly for the rest of the day, transforming the principal's office into an improvised command center. As more students and teachers learned about the situation, more stories and evidence emerged. By the end of that historic afternoon, as the sun set over the school, Marcus found himself reflecting on how a single injustice had revealed an entire system of inequality. His personal fight had become something much bigger than himself. You know what's ironic? He said to Amanda as they organized the documents. They tried to silence me, but in the end, they gave a voice to hundreds of others who had been silenced before me. As Jennifer Martinez would later write in her public testimony, sometimes it takes a particularly visible injustice to expose all the invisible injustices we've normalized for so long. Marcus was not just a victim. He was the catalyst we needed to finally confront a truth that many of us already knew but were afraid to face. The battle was far from over, but now they had something they'd never had before. Concrete evidence and a growing union of voices determined to be heard. The school auditorium had never been so packed. Not even during the annual graduations had so many people gathered in that space. Students, teachers, parents, school board members, and local press representatives crowded into the seats, while others stood along the sides. The air was thick with anticipation and tension. Backstage, Marcus adjusted his tie for the third time, his hands slightly trembling. Through the curtain, he could see Mr. Harrison sitting in the front row, his face a mask of studied indifference. Next to him, Michael seemed smaller than usual, avoiding looking in any specific direction. Are you ready? Olivia asked, adjusting her son's collar. In her hands, she held a folder containing not only the evidence they had gathered but also the document they had prepared in recent days, a detailed plan for systemic reform of the school district. It's not just about me anymore, is it? Marcus replied, his voice quiet but firm. It never was really. Amanda approached, followed by Sarah and other members of the group that had formed in the past few weeks. All the testimonies are organized, she reported, and 3 more students from other schools just arrived with their own stories. Director Thompson, who had insisted on leading this assembly as her final official act, stepped onto the stage. The murmur of the crowd gradually quieted as she approached the microphone. Today, she began, her voice carrying a weight few had noticed before, we are not here just to discuss an isolated incident. We are here to confront a difficult truth about our institution and our educational system as a whole. In the audience, Jennifer Martinez, the coordinator who had exposed the documents, held her own folder of evidence. Her face showed a mixture of apprehension and determination. Next to her, Robert Chin, Amanda's father and a member of the school board, took quick notes. I now call Marcus Johnson, the principal announced, not as an accused student, but as a voice that forced us to see what we have long chosen to ignore. Marcus' steps echoed through the silent auditorium as he made his way to the stage. He paused for a moment, observing the hundreds of faces staring at him. Some hostile, others supportive, many simply curious. 3 weeks ago, he began, his voice initially low but gaining strength, I was sitting in the principal's office, being accused of something that represents everything I've always fought against. At that moment I thought I was alone. Today I realize I never was. Marcus unfolded a paper from his pocket, but he didn't really need it. Every word he was about to say was engraved in his heart, forged in sleepless nights and days of struggle. This is not a story about a false accusation. It's a story about how power and privilege can be used to silence voices that don't fit a predetermined mold. It's about how institutions that should nurture talent can, instead, systematically stifle it. In the middle of the audience, some students began to stand up. They were faces from different grades and classes, each holding a paper or a poster with their own stories of veiled discrimination. "We discovered," Marcus continued, his voice now firm and clear, "a decades-long pattern. Not just in our school but throughout the district. A system that decides who deserves opportunities not based on merit or potential, but on factors that should never matter in a just society." Mr. Harrison shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Some members of the school board exchanged worried glances. "But today," Marcus went on, "we are not just here to expose injustices. We are here to propose concrete changes." He gestured, and Amanda stood up, beginning to hand out copies of the document they had prepared. "This is our reform plan. Developed not just by me but by dozens of students, teachers and parents who believe our education can and should be better. It includes specific policies to ensure transparency in all administrative decisions, clear and fair criteria for academic opportunities, and an independent oversight board." The tension in the auditorium was palpable. Mr. Harrison stood up as if to say something, but was interrupted by an unexpected voice. "Father, no." Michael Harrison had stood up as well, his hands visibly trembling. "Enough. I can't take it anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael walked to the stage, each step seeming to cost him an immense effort. "I want to confess something," he said, his voice breaking. "It wasn't just about the student council election. For years I've seen how my father and others used their power to keep people like Marcus away from leadership positions. I took part in that. I benefited from it. And I can't live with this guilt anymore." Mr. Harrison moved toward his son, but was stopped by other parents. On stage, Michael continued, "Marcus is not just innocent of the accusation we made. He is exactly the kind of leader our school has always needed. Someone who fights not only for himself but for everyone who has been silenced." Michael's words triggered a chain reaction. One by one, other students began to stand, sharing their own experiences of discrimination and exclusion. The auditorium transformed into a space of collective catharsis, years of silence being broken in a single afternoon. Olivia, watching from the side of the stage, felt silent tears running down her face. Her son had not only cleared his name, he had started a movement that promised to transform the educational system from within. "This is just the beginning," Marcus concluded, his voice carrying a mix of emotion and determination. "Real change takes more than words or promises. It requires continuous action, constant vigilance, and above all, the courage to face uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our institutions." When he finished speaking, the auditorium erupted in applause. It wasn't just applause and support, it was a collective commitment to the change that Marcus and his allies had initiated. As Robert Chin would later write in his report to the school board, "That afternoon we witnessed more than a speech. We witnessed the exact moment when an institution was forced to confront its own conscience. And it all began because a young man refused to accept injustice as normal." The battle was far from over, but in that moment, looking out at the sea of determined faces in front of him, Marcus knew that the change they had dreamed of was not only possible, it was inevitable. 6 months had passed since that historic afternoon in the auditorium. Fall painted the campus trees in golden hues, and a new energy pulsed through the school's hallways. Where there had once been whispers and wary glances, now there was an atmosphere of openness and dialogue. Marcus walked through the courtyard, observing the posters for the new student council election process. This time, the photos of the candidates reflected the true diversity of the student body. A small smile formed on his lips as he saw Amanda among the candidates. "Thinking about how everything has changed?" Sarah asked, catching up with him with hurried steps. In her hands, she held the latest edition of the school newspaper, where a headline read, "School district reforms serve as model for state." The transformation had been profound and systematic. After the assembly, a series of immediate changes were implemented. Mr. Harrison resigned from the donor board, and a new policy of transparency was established for all financial contributions. Director Thompson, keeping her word, retired, but not before helping to implement the proposed reforms. "It's strange to think that it all started with a false accusation," Marcus replied, sitting down on one of the new benches in the courtyard. part of the improvements now funded by a diverse group of donors. The new school governance system, developed with significant input from students, had become an example of participatory democracy. An independent oversight board, composed of teachers, parents, and students, now monitored all major decisions. Jennifer Martinez, the coordinator who had exposed the crucial documents, was promoted to Director of Diversity and Inclusion for the district, a position created specifically to ensure the changes would be lasting. "Did you see the latest statistics?" Sarah asked, opening her laptop. "The number of minority students in advanced programs has increased by 60% this semester. And transfer requests to our school have tripled." Michael Harrison, surprisingly, had become one of the biggest advocates for the reforms. After his public confession, he dedicated himself to working with Marcus's group, using his privilege and connections to open doors that had previously remained closed. "My father still doesn't speak to me," he had confided in Marcus during one of the new Student Ethics Committee meetings. "But for the first time in my life I feel like I'm doing the right thing." The change extended beyond the walls of the school. Other districts began implementing similar policies, using the model developed by Marcus and his group as a foundation. Olivia, now frequently invited to speak on educational reform, watched with pride as her son's struggle had transformed into a larger movement. "You know what's even more impressive?" Amanda commented, joining them in the courtyard. "The freshmen this year. They don't even know how it was before. To them, a truly inclusive school is the norm." Marcus smiled, remembering his own journey. The pain of the unjust accusation had turned into something bigger than himself. The movement that had started from his personal struggle now inspired others to find their own voices. The old principal's office, where everything had begun, now housed the Student Advocacy Center. On the walls, photos and documents told the story of the school's transformation, serving as a constant reminder that change is possible when brave people come together for a just cause. "Sometimes I wonder," Marcus reflected, "how many other schools still have systems like the one we faced? How many other students are being silenced at this very moment?" "That's why our work isn't over," Sarah responded, showing him on her laptop the website they had created. "We've already received messages from students in 3 different states asking for help to implement similar reforms." The group had transformed into an official student organization, offering support and guidance to other schools interested in systemic change. The document they had created, initially a local proposal, was now circulating as a blueprint for educational reform. "The most important thing," Amanda added, "is that we're not just fighting against something. We're building something new." At that moment, a group of freshmen passed by them, chatting excitedly about the upcoming student council debate. Their voices, diverse in accents and backgrounds, blended naturally, a scene that would have been rare just a few months ago. Olivia, watching her son from a distance, was talking to Robert Chen about the next steps for the mentorship program they had established. The program paired upperclassmen with freshmen, ensuring no student felt isolated or unsupported. "You changed this school, son," she had said the night before during dinner. "But more importantly, you've shown that change is possible anywhere people have the courage to stand up for the truth." The afternoon went on, and the 3 friends headed to the student committee meeting. On the way, they passed by the library, where a new section dedicated to social justice and student activism had been created. Marcus's book, a detailed journal of his experience and the subsequent reforms, occupied a prominent place. "Sometimes I wonder," he shared with his friends, "what would have happened if I had just accepted the accusation? If I had let fear silence me?" "But you didn't," Amanda replied, her voice firm. "And that's why we're all here today." The sun was setting over the campus, casting long shadows through the windows. Somewhere, a bell rang, marking the end of another day at the transformed school. For Marcus, each toll of that bell was a reminder. Real change begins with a single voice that refuses to be silenced. As he would write in the conclusion of his book, our story is not just about confronting injustice. It's about turning pain into purpose, fear into courage, and silence into action. It's a reminder that each of us has the power to spark changes that will echo far beyond our time and place. So, did this story touch your heart? Have you ever lived through or witnessed something similar? Share your experience in the comments. Your voice matters, and it can inspire others to fight for justice too. If this story of overcoming and change moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Hit the like button so more people can hear it, and turn on the notification bell for the Life Stories channel so you won't miss our next inspiring stories. Together we can make a difference, one story at a time.